When America's most influential chefs decided that it was time to have a cocktail element to their experiences, that was actually where this book began. And I didn't want to write like a chefy restaurant book.
This is Taste. I'm your host, Matt Rodbard. Jim Meehan is here for a wide-ranging and highly entertaining conversation. Jim is the legendary New York City barman behind the East Village icon PDT. He's also a journalist and author of 3 books, including the PDT Cocktail Book, Meehan's Bartender Manual, and the brand new and excellent The Bartender's Pantry. On this episode, we go back in time to the dawn of the modern cocktail movement and relive some of the big openings and stories of the age. Jim also reflects on his current status at PDT, as well as his book writing career and how there's so much more to a cocktail pantry than you think. It's so fun catching up with Jim, and I hope you enjoy this conversation. Jim Meehan, welcome to This Is Taste. Great to see you, my friend. How are you?
I'm wonderful. It's an honor to be here.
It's an honor to have you on Pub Day. So your book is out today, The Bartender's Pantry. Amazing.
Thank you. Yeah,
Congrats.
This is it's a really exciting time.
You're back in New York. For those who don't know, we associate you with New York. You started PDT. You're part of our community. I say I don't even live here anymore. But you've lived in Portland for 10 years.
Yeah, 10 years in August.
Amazing. So when you return to New York, where are you going? Do you have a couple spots that you always like to hit up?
It's funny, Superiority Burger has become my new sort of like leveling place where I land and I go there. I used to go to 9th Street Espresso, which is still great, but La Cabra has opened and I'm
so good.
Portland has definitely brought me down off the deep end on coffee. So now I go to a more serious coffee shop
right.
in 9th Street. But yeah, so I landed, I went to La Cabra, I went to Superiority Burger. I was back in my element.
Oh my God. Those are 2 great picks in the East Village. What about bar-wise? I know you're doing events and you've got obligations. Are you hitting up PDT?
A very funny thing just happened. I just did an event for Ben Leventhal at Blackbird, and he said that his space is located where the old Cornelia Street Cafe bar is. And so we went to the old Cornelia Street Cafe, and I walked into the door, and there was this very serious looking cocktail bar with this young mixologist prepping. And I was like, is this Blackbird? And she looked at me like I had 6 heads. And then we walked outside and I looked at the door and it's Sip and Guzzle. It's Shingo and Steve's new bar, which I've been wanting to go to, but I haven't had time to go visit. And then I texted Ben and realized he's over on Lafayette Street. So the short answer to your question is no. I find that when I get back, I'm more interested in catching up with people than I am with going and checking out all the new bars. So my last visit here, I finally made it to Overstory. It took me way too long to see what Harrison's doing up there. And I haven't made it to Double Chicken yet. And that's on the list. So I feel like I'm many awards and places on the 50 best away from even knowing what's going on in New York anymore.
Yeah. What about restaurant-wise? There's got to be some, you mentioned Superiority, of course, to level set.
Yeah. I feel like I also, with restaurants, there's so many places that I want to eat that I'm way behind there. So I feel like my priorities when I come back to New York are people and then probably, coffee and more casual places.
Yeah.
And then okay, let's see what the Joneses who are really doing it are doing.
Let's ball out and go somewhere.
Yeah.
No, but what about PDT?
PDT is now owned and operated by my former protege Jeff Bell, and I was sort of non-serendipitously ejected from PDT, so I have nothing to do with it. It remains a bit of a thorn in my side. I feel like I was talking with someone recently about it, and I feel like I've long gotten over the fact that me and PDT was a job and it was a place that I started. But I miss Jeff Bell was a friend and I miss the friendship and I miss that part of it. Today I just had coffee with A.K. Hata, who was our head bartender. And last night at our event at Porchlight, Ann Robinson was there, who worked with me there for 5 years. And so I feel like the once again, like I'm a relationship oriented person. That's what I value.
Can this relationship be mended?
I think so. I think every relationship can be mended.
Right.
I think time allows a lot for people who want to do the work. You know, everything happens for a reason. And I try to like look for the reasons in not only like what happens for all the good things that have happened in my life, but for all the things that have like not gone my way. And I feel like I very much feel that even though that there's a traumatic break right now, that where there's a will and where there's heart and where there's room for reconciliation and for understanding, there's room for relationships that are broken or not serving two people to re-enter it under new terms, under new management.
Yeah, I feel like this is so optimistic and cool of you to say, and I feel I'm hopeful that you'll be able to walk into the bar and it'll feel better.
Honestly, like the bar has always been a dump. Like the thing that I always thought was one, like I remember when we won the Beard Award and I almost thought someone was going to tear it from my neck on the way out of the hall. And I feel like PDT was a magic trick. And the magic was that we brought people into that little dump in the East Village and they had the time of their life. And I feel like it remains a dump. What was great about it is the magic. And I feel like that is something that, you know, I don't need to walk into 113 St. Mark's again to feel that magic. That magic was something that people did. And I still am in a relationship with many of them. And while I would love to go back and sort of, you know, see the lightning in the bottle as it sort of like as you watch new people walk through the phone booth for the first time, have hot dogs and cocktails for the first time, like it never gets old, especially like once you've been part of that magic trick.
Let's go back to that time when you launched it. And I feel like we talked about this off mic in Portland recently, but I want to have it here, the conversation about how this was history. You were living modern history at that time when you opened PDT. The culinary movement wasn't a movement. It was a micro earthquake. It was a tremor, right? It started in New York. Obviously, San Francisco had a presence as well. Los Angeles had a presence, but really, it really was kind of, you were at the center of this thing that back in food media, it was only being covered seriously by a few people. And obviously, there's a lot of history of covering drinks, but really, there was a moment with PDT and many others where it became mainstream. Talk about being in the moment, and when did you realize it was actual modern history that you were living?
I think that when I opened the Pegu Club in 2005, and I knew that bar was going to be historic before it opened, and that's why I begged my way onto its staff. You know, we trained at Julie Reiner's Flatiron Lounge, you know, for months before we actually got into the space and got to train there. So, I mean, I knew that place was, I saw what Audrey was putting into that. And so that was when I kind of knew that something really different and special was going on. I used to work Mondays and Tuesdays. I worked one shift a week, and it was we were not busy back then. Like mixology was not popular. I used to joke to young bartenders today that back then it was like playing D&D, but the funny thing is playing D&D is very cool now. So like the analogy
doesn't even work.
The analogy doesn't work. Like 30-sided dice are cool now. But so while it wasn't cool, the thing that, you know, 2 + 2 = 4, like most of our regulars were journalists. Like we basically had a bar full of journalists, you know, on my Mondays and Tuesdays every week. So it was only a matter of time when you have your whole bar full of journalists that the drinks are going to end up in newspapers and magazines. And Audrey was an excellent communicator. She was a great interviewer, and she cultivated those relationships. So, I mean, I feel like I learned a lot about how to cultivate this movement through listening and watching Audrey Saunders and how she handled herself. And then I was obviously like also able to like work my own magic by the job I got at Food and Wine. My brother was friends with Rob Willey, who edited the first 2 Food and Wine cocktail books. And so when Rob moved on to Maxim, there was an opening, and I got a text from Rob being like, hey, would you be interested in editing Food and Wine Magazine's cocktail book? And I was like, yes, I would.
Yes.
And so Kate Crater and Dana Cowan and that, you know, that crew really sort of like, they believed in me. And year by year, they gave me more to work with.
Yeah, Jess, are you bummed to be missing Aspen? I feel like you probably
went to funny.
Like every June, you probably had on your calendar for 2 weeks to be in Aspen.
So last night we had our sort of like pre pub day launch event, and I was thinking like it's BCB, so like a lot of my friends are in Brooklyn, and then I realized and the Beard Awards are going on. I like after my book event, I like looked to see who won the Beard Awards last night. And congratulations, Chris Hanna. And then realized today I went to dinner at Chiquette last night, and Vicky Freeman, who was my first boss at 5 Points back in 2003, is going to Aspen right now for the first time. So I owe Vicky a list. So I feel like, there's so much going on in the food world like this very moment.
Yeah, but I mean, you spent so much time being on stage there, being part of that kind of link between New York City and, as I mentioned, San Francisco and the mainstream. Food and Wine is read at that time by tens of millions of people, right? Yeah. It's like one of the biggest publications in the country, and you're writing the books and you're in the magazines. Let me ask you, Jim, what's the way that you're teaching the masses about drinks back then? And we're reflecting back.
I mean, a lot of, frankly, what I was doing was really. I was just giving a talk about this earlier to the team at Blackbird, and that is that I think that there's a prevalent view in media, in publishing, in probably many disciplines beyond food, that the general consumer is like not interested in like the way that pros actually do things, and that what they would like is a watered down version that they could either do at home or something that's just going to like bother their pretty little head. Like, because like, why would you want to know like actually the way the pros do things? And the thorn that I probably represented to the entire editorial staff at Food and Wine and to everyone who I've ever published a book with is like, I believe the consumer actually wants to know everything about what goes on in bars and restaurants. And I, as someone who works in them, would like to be the one that welcomes them behind the curtain and not only shows them what we do and how we do it, but why and explain why we do it. Because I believe that, I mean, I realized quite a long time ago that like, it's like fishing. You can either give someone a fish or you can teach them to fish. And when you teach someone to fish, you give them an appreciation that, for instance, like someone who knows how to play guitar is not going to go to an Mdu Mokhtar show and be like, oh, well, I could play guitar like that. They're going to understand more of why Mdu Mokhtar is great, not less. And so the more our guests know how the food gets made or the drinks get made, the more they're going to appreciate their dining experience.
Excellence of it, the high end, the highest esteem, right? The quality, the craftsmanship, they're going to understand it.
Exactly. And that is not a magic trick. Like there's no magic behind the food and drinks. The food and drinks are literally you put into you get out of the food what you put into it. And the best restaurants and bars put everything into the food and drink. And I feel like, and then they reap the rewards of that.
So back when you were writing for Food and Wine, this was your ethic, this was your North Star, to teach everybody everything?
Well, my North Star was like, if it was happening in a bar or a restaurant, we as Food and Wine should tell people. Yeah. So if it has 7 ingredients, if it has egg white in it, if it's shaken or double shaken or triple shaken or whatever they do to it, we should report that. And I'm not a trained journalist. So frankly, like, this isn't coming from any journalistic ethic. It's more coming from just a transparency ethic where it's like, if that's what they do in restaurants, we're a magazine that covers restaurants. Let's tell them what they do.
Was there a drink that you published in the pages of Food and Wine or in the books that you felt was a great gateway? I have a couple theories writing about it in the early 2000s when I started writing about drinks, but I want to hear from you.
That's a great question. I think that there isn't, I edited, I think, 6 of them or 7 of them. I can't remember at this stage, a lot of them. And then I assisted with like, we had Joaquin Simo one year and John DeBerry and Lindsay Nader, I think, helped one year. So and then I kind of pieced out and John DeBerry took over completely from me. But I think that for me, one of the things I've learned as I've gotten older is that what one person's gateway or bridge is not there's no one size fits all bridge for all customers or guests or people who appreciate the craft. So I've I know this will probably disappoint some listeners. Now, once I like really believed and learned that to be true, I've stopped like putting too many of my eggs in any one basket as far as like the gateways or the bridges. And I've started like just kind of looking for more of them, if that makes sense. I feel like I had a realization recently that I think I've spent the first half of my career getting people who are really interested in what I do more interested. And I haven't spent as much time getting people who are either unaware of what I do for a living or who are like passingly interested and uncommitted over it to like consider it. So I think that for my second half, if I'm lucky, I'd like to bring more people into the fold.
I like that a lot.
Yeah, as opposed to like digging like either having a higher, ivory tower or like,
Well, there's always going to be the stigma that you have to fight. I mean, I won't even say the word suspenders, but it certainly is something that people still talk about.
Yeah.
I think Bartender's Pantry does a little bit of both, and we'll get to why I think it's really a great work in that it's really de-emphasizing spirits and more thinking about the actual building blocks of drinks and thinking about it in more culinary terms too.
Yeah.
I do want to get to that conversation, but I still have a few more things.
Yeah.
Back to my theory too. I think to me it was the Negroni because it's simple, it's equal parts, it's using a couple ingredients that kind of diametrically opposed. Vermouth and Campari. I feel gin is always around. To me, that was a great gateway. Negroni Week became a thing, and frankly, everyone can make one.
I think that the Negroni is a great example of a drink app because I think people think of like a daiquiri as, a daiquiri. And it's like actually a daiquiri is a snake pit because everyone has a different preference for strong, sweet, sour. And so there's so many ways you can go sideways with that drink. Whereas I like gin, I like Campari, and I like sweet vermouth. They don't require special, like you don't have to leave them in the fridge or like an old bottle of Campari actually gets better. And I find that like a Negroni with too much gin or too much sweet vermouth or too much Campari is still pretty darn drinkable. And especially if you order on the rocks, if they don't stir it or, long enough, the ice will do its work. So it's a very forgiving drink. And I think that that's something that like I think too many people underestimate a gin and tonic as being a simple drink, which is, I don't think it is. But they think that too many people think, I talked about this in this reel I just did with Jordan Hughes, and it's things that are simple are actually elemental. Simple is a dangerous trap. It's not simple.
No, it's elemental. And I think with the gin and tonic, just dilution in general, too many cubes and you've shot your tonic water.
Or too big of a glass. I mean, too many people grab like a 32-ounce Big Gulp cup and they don't realize like you're going to have to put like 8 or 9 ounces of gin in there probably if you don't have the right ice cubes to make a balanced gin and tonic.
Yeah. And I've given up drinking long ago. And I think the one drink I always make is the Negroni because I kind of have moved on from carrying and for me and I just like the simplicity of doing gin, Negroni on the rocks.
Yeah.
It's like a few more questions, and I'm thrilled to have you here because I think you are so thoughtful about the way you evolve drinks, and I think this book is a strong testament to that. I sent you this question ahead of time, and really deep breath. Can we do a Mount Rushmore of living bartenders right now? I know it's like highly subjective, and you've got buddies in the industry. I'd love to get your take.
Yeah, this was an easy one for me. There were a lot of questions that you sent me that I like actually somewhat struggled with, but this was very easy. Julie Reiner is you may not, I think that like when people think of the Mount Rushmore living bartenders, that Julie Reiner, if she isn't like the first person, they're like whatever, I don't know if Washington's the first person on Mount Rushmore, but like, what she has done, what she is continuing to do, like I frequently get called a legend, and it's something that like, it burns me a little bit in the sense that to me, like legend is like a past tense thing. Like there's nothing more kind of terrifying to me, frankly, than being called a legend and thinking like, are my best years like behind me? Yeah. Whereas like, I wonder if people call Julie Reiner a legend because she's still doing so much, whether it's like her, her TV work right now, the bars she's opening, she's already written a book, her RTD brand, her like just like she is. And I think back to like going back to like my like, entry into this industry, like she was a partner in the Pegu Club, Flatiron Lounge opened 2 years before that. She's had things like, Lani Kai, which like was a sort of blip. Like she and her partner, Susan, are they are just real G's.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I lived in Carroll Gardens for 17 years, and I went to the first night of Clover Club, and I went there on my wedding day. So that tells you how much Julie Reiner means to me as well.
And I think you look at New York, and it's like all these people, like, Audrey lives on the West Coast now. I live on the West Coast now. Simon Ford, like every single person that was running bars, gone. Like we all are burnt. And Julie's just like sharpening her knives.
Yeah.
She is next level.
In fact, they just opened a new spot next
last
Clover
night.
Club. Yeah, literally just opened days ago. So there's a new bar on Smith Street. Go to Carroll Gardens. Who's the number 2 on your Mount Rushmore?
I mean, honestly, there's Julie Reiner and there's everyone else.
Oh, I see. So you went that way. Okay.
Yeah, I feel like it's
that
like
take.
I don't think
like that
there is. I don't think anyone's even close, frankly. Like I think that like there's really, if you look closely at the body of work and the body of work that is still going on, she is peerless.
So you write in The Bartender's Pantry, bartenders are increasingly caretaking the narrative of ingredients, past, present, and future, in addition to coaxing out the best qualities in the glass. I think that's such a beautiful line. Tell me, why write this book about the pantry, and how does this quote relate to that?
Well, I first want to give a special shout out to Emma Jansen, who was brought in on this project as my wheels were spinning. And that sentence itself has a lot of Emma Jansen in it. But I think that the idea here has to do with the fact that, cooks, by virtue of the fact that they work in the kitchen, and many kitchen and restaurants and bars are not set up to have the cook actually deliver the food they're cooking to the guest. Some do, but most don't. And so because of that, the service staff, which includes the bartender, not only has to like make drinks, but has to tell the story of the drinks they make to the guests who want to increasingly know more and more and more about what they're eating and drinking. So I think that like part of this is systemic, or part of this is structural. It's baked into how bars and restaurants worked. But I think part of it is also one thing that I've seen develop, and it started certainly at like the Pegu Club as, bartenders became very passionate about gin, and then about rye whiskey, and then, like it's gone on to now it's like shochu and mezcal and whatnot. But I think that bartenders are natural sort of like advocates, spokespeople, conservationists, people who wear their ethics and values on their sleeves and particularly like to tattoo them on. And I find that it's only as I like thought about a book that would really, there's so many books now, so you have to really think, if I'm going to write a book, is this thing need to take up paper?
Particularly in the drinks category, which is just published and well published for a decade. Tensby Press does the best.
So I wanted to make sure that the book was worth the paper it was printed on in a world where we got to be thinking about how much paper we're putting in the world. And I think that this book, it doesn't yet exist. Like I think Harold McGee and certain other writers have written about something like this in the food space, but it doesn't yet exist in the drink space. And as I increasingly began to think about where there's room for innovation and advocacy and progress in the drink space, I think that the same sort of passion that bartenders have for single village mezcal or for, different craft spirits, I think that like they are beginning to develop and see an interest in these ingredients. And I felt like if I could give them more, like more of a toehold in some of these things, which they work with on a daily basis. But I think in many ways our food system and our food ways obscure the origins of our ingredients at great financial gain to them and at great loss to many of our bartenders and to our guests. So I think that a lot of what this book is, it's a service-y book that raises awareness of, producers like Ori was at Burlap and Barrel, was with Garrett Oliver last night at our event. And it's like, I thanked him after the event because what Burlap and Barrel is doing is like the blueprint for what I would love to see throughout all the chapters in this book. Yeah,
Ori's a great example. He's been a guest on the show, and just thinking about back to drinks and the making of drinks, it's not just the spirits. It's not just these bottles that are more and more driven by conglomerates and large scale of financial operations. And really, yes, we have a lot to say about spirits, but let's back up and talk about the syrups. Let's talk about spice. Let's talk about building umami. Let's talk about fermentation, which you talk about in all these elements. So I think this is really so progressive for a book. It's not easy all the time. The book is like definitely, I would say, more of a guidebook, a glossary in a Harold McGee sense than something you're going to sit down and read the full thing, though I'm sure listeners will enjoy reading through each chapter. Take us through a little bit about how you and Emma and team thought about structuring the book, and what as a reader, and smash that buy link in the show notes. You should buy this book. How are we gonna work through it?
I built this out and was Bart Sasso, who is my partner on the project, who is the creative director and partner in the Ticonderoga Club in Atlanta. His work down there, his creative work down there, and his work in branding and identity was so strong, and that I wanted to bring someone like him in to help me create an object, because I feel like so many of the books that I love are not just filled with interesting information, but they're beautiful to hold, to read, to own. We honed in on this idea of handbook. My last book was the manual. Mm-hmm. The book before that was the cocktail book. So handbook ended up being a really animating principle between like the sort of focal, like where are we sort of like honing in focal point wise, like how deep do we want to go? So this is not an encyclopedia, and it isn't a manual. It's not a manifesto. It's a handbook that really kind of goes back to the 90s era bartender, which is about one of the big values of this book is being a generalist. And I feel like as I sort of assessed the zeitgeist and like the sort of world in which I was writing in, I feel like we all live in a world full of deep expertise. And I feel like someone who knows everything about Korean food might know nothing about Japanese food, or someone who knows everything about tiki drinks might know very little about Italian aperitivos. And I feel like while I love listening to an expert get crazy deep about what their field of expertise is, I feel like generalist values was something that I sort of wanted to bring back to the front and center here. And so the handbook was a sort of way in which we sort of were able to do that conceptually. As far as the reader experience here, really the book started on a recipe collection process pre-pandemic, where I looked at the history, which now it is history, which is so weird, but I look at the cocktail renaissance, this thing that you and I used to be a part of back in the day. And I think that as we look back with our rose-colored glasses, I feel like the story of the lounges is really, David Wondrich, who wrote the Oxford Companion to Spirits of Cocktails, which historically ends really sort of, right around the beginning of the cocktail renaissance. But I think that the story of the Renaissance period is really told mostly through lounges, where as someone who worked at Gramercy Tavern and worked in restaurants before I started focusing on lounge work, I think that the effect of with Ticonderoga Club, they were working with Linton Hopkins at Eugene and Holman and Finch, and it was a big deal. When Linton Hopkins came to Pegu Club, he told us in 2005 that he had a Jerry Thomas, and it was hugely influential to him. Or, when Barbara Lynch opened Drink with John Gertzen after many years at Number 9 Park, or, with Jackson at Eastern Standard, and with Thad at, eventually opening Agricole, but before that being at Slanted Door with Eric Adkins, and Marco Dionysus at Absinthe. And so I could go city to city, but every major city in America about 20 years ago, whether it's Grand Achatz and Aviary, or it just goes on, Daniel Hume, when Will Guidera, turning the Nomad more into a bar than a restaurant. When America's most influential chefs decided that it was time to have a cocktail element to their experiences, that was actually where this book began. And I will preface these remarks by saying, I didn't want to write a chefy restaurant book, but I did want to reorient our rose-colored glasses towards the contribution of bartenders like Claire Sprouse, or bartenders like Jana Wolfson, who ran the Enrique Olvera's programs, and I feel like there are so many bartenders in this book that many of them are household names, but some of them aren't. And it's because they were running restaurant bar programs where the chef still got the lion's share of the
usually
attention.
the 12th or 14th graph in a review.
Correct.
Right. And it's a really solid point. Thank you for really laying it out how, restaurants and fine dining leading to the bar program led to this really exciting moment of the lounge, as you're saying. And I wonder, just to kind of go in a little different direction, when all the chefs that you mentioned, all the restaurants you mentioned decided to break into bar, how much of it was art and how much of it was commerce? Because it seems like, this is a commercially driven decision to the margins of running a bar to the side of your fine dining restaurant. Because, when you throw down a cloth napkin, you ain't making any money. That's like the whole adage.
Right.
Is it a real commercial thought?
I mean, impetus? You look at, I think that the Violet Hour, Paul Kahn's, bar, like some of these places are still open. Some of them aren't, and I think
Booker
that
and Dax RIP not open anymore.
Yeah. So I feel like I don't have a definitive answer whether they did it for money or for the art. But the thing I'll say is none of them had to do it. They were that powerful, and many of them remain that powerful. So I think that irregardless of whether they did it because it was profitable or not, the fact that they did it really made a difference, and I think that was part of the story I wanted to tell.
Yeah, and Bartender's Pantry just again is really laying out the foundation of how to really take the drink and bring it down to its most basic format outside of the spirits in many ways. Tell us, how do we use the book? Give us some examples.
I mean, I don't know if I have ADD, but I don't have a long attention span. So I'm not, I guess I'm undiagnosed, but I would say that I usually start writing books, or I create projects that first are interesting to me because it takes me a long time to do them. So hopefully I'm enamored with it enough to stick with it. So I feel like you can pick it up and read it from the beginning to the end. It reads like a great book, I think, but if you're like me and you don't have that level of attention, you can pick it up and, go to the spice chapter, and there's like 3,000 words about spices that talks about, first how they were used originally in cocktails, and then what spices are, and then where they come from, and then how they're processed, and how they're then, distributed from the processing point, and then how you would source them and prep them. And then it goes into 4 illustrated recipes for how you would incorporate them into a beverage mixture, and then 6 photographed recipes that incorporate mixtures throughout the book. So it has, there's like a choose your own adventure, path. There's a cover to cover path. There's also just I want to read one recipe, and every recipe comes with who, what, when, where, how, and why, and a pretty picture. Yeah,
beautiful way to say it, because it really does have utility, right? Choose your own adventure, but definitely the writing that you and Emma worked on for so long is really great, and it feels like there's small essays and large essays. There's points of view. The tough question, but do you feel like this book, is there any ground that you broke that you feel really particularly proud about, that you were able to really bring into focus, something that maybe in PDT and in the manual, your 2 previous books, you just didn't do, and now you're here?
Not to get too heavy too quickly, but I just feel like writing this book during the pandemic from Portland, Oregon, during social justice protests that lasted a lot longer than anywhere else in the country, it seems like. I was an African-American studies major at the University of Wisconsin and an English major, and I feel like it sort of reforged some interest in some pathways that had sort of been lying fallow for a very long time. And I feel like as someone who I'd like to think of as a progressive person, I feel like the lenses of race and gender and class and really sort of were something that I wove into this book. I feel like the previous, I've become more political as I've gotten older, and I feel like that is something that makes a lot of people uncomfortable, but I feel like it's something that I feel righteous about. So I think that while I don't think this is a liberal Portland book, that you sort of will, that someone can lampoon in political media, I do think that there were some things that I was able to articulate through using food and drink as a sort of proxy that I feel like are really, that you don't see in a lot of food books. And that I think whether people agree with it or not, I think I laid out my reasons and I laid out my points. And I think that I said something last night, which I had no plans of talking about, but I think that there are recipes like horchata or tepache or kombucha, kvass, chai. And I, as someone who's like not a scholar, but who tries to be scholarly in my research, I frequently wasn't finding a lot of information about this drink. And it hit me like a ton of bricks when I realized the reason why these drinks aren't in a lot of books and the reason why there's not a lot of research on them, I think, is because these are drinks that are created by women and they're made by women and the prep that goes into them is laborious. And a lot of these women come from cultures where their recipes and their traditions are passed down orally, and they're only passed down orally because no one has taken the time to interview them and really find out what exactly they're doing. And there was like a real sort of like patriarchal, like sort of like moment where I realized like, this is sad that there are these brilliant recipes they're just overlooked. They're taken for granted. And I think labor is something that like, I think Emma and I really were able to like, when we talk about the importance of like knowing who grows your food, it's not some sort of like gestural, like
virtue signaling.
Virtue signaling.
Yeah.
It's really like field workers are skilled laborers, and they're and growing and picking and like in agave and she she's an expert in the agave space. Like there's a great reverence for the humidor, the people who harvest the agaves, and I feel like that sort of reverence should be bestowed upon strawberry pickers and upon people who harvest cinnamon quills. So I feel like it's hopefully like people. There was someone I talked to recently who said he didn't realize that like every cinnamon quill is made by hand, and I think that that's something that like. I think that our food is so packaged and we're so divorced from the reality of where it comes from and how it's processed. And so I feel like hopefully people will become more aware of that and more appreciative.
And not just aware of that idea, but of food having a place, but also drinks should be included in all this conversation. And that's the whole ethic of this book. It's really that when you go and order a cocktail, be it at a dive bar and it's a rum and coke, or be it a intricate 8-part, daiquiri, there's going to be a lot of people who touch those ingredients.
There's I buried the lead as many of us oftentimes do in our books, but basically what I've sort of said at the end of skip to the afterword if you want to get to the juicy bits,
right.
people. But the afterword has the juicy bits. But I feel like in the afterwards, I say that, the drinks that I'm writing about and the sort of recipes that I'm talking about, once you understand that drinks are not salad and therefore you should not drink alcohol like you eat salad, which hopefully you eat your vegetables. Once you stop thinking about and like drinking like you eat salad, hopefully, you will realize that like cocktails occupy the same space at the dinner table or in a restaurant or a bar as like say chocolate cake does or as like a Wagyu beef. You shouldn't eat a lot of Wagyu beef and you shouldn't eat a lot of chocolate cake, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't have like a little bit of it. And I think that I tried to sort of, and I buried this in the back, but I will say that like I think once we stop drinking alcohol or covering alcohol as if it's like this innocuous substance and start viewing it like any other thing we do in our life, whether it's working out or sleeping or having sex or eating, everything needs to be done in moderation. And the reality is we all need to drink a lot less, but that doesn't mean we need to not drink at all. And I think that like one thing that I won't apologize for is that I think food and drink are not different. They are the same thing. And making drinks, especially these type of drinks, is cooking. They're not different.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's my huge takeaway from this exactly. And really earlier in the conversation, you drew the connection between the fine dining chefs embracing the bar program, and clearly there being a lot of like relationships here. And you're publishing a cookbook.
It is a cookbook.
I mean, this is truly what it is. I mean, it's not a drinks book. And what a challenging topic to really chew. And it must have been a lot of soul searching to bring these big ideas into focus, but you've done it brilliantly.
Thank you. I mean, I really give Emma a lot of credit for, I also like, there's a lot of quoting. Like I read a lot of books. There are a lot of other writers' big ideas in here. Yeah. Like this book doesn't occur without Wendell Berry or Alice Waters. I mean, I could go on and on.
You have a great glossary with a lot of other sources, and definitely you give acknowledgement. You mentioned that you're a University of Wisconsin grad, as am I. We attended the school at the same time. Go Badgers, I guess. No, actually, I've thought about it a lot. I don't love the mascot. I'm just not a huge fan of the aesthetics of the Badger.
Never minded Bucky Badger.
You never minded it. But anyways, we both attended at the same time. We didn't know each other in college per se, but I did go to your bars, Paul's Club and Jenna's. And I was just there for this great work we were doing with Wisconsin Cheese Board. And I was there and I was walking, and Jenna's is open and the Dice is open and the Tornado Room is still open. All of those places. What's it like working at Jenna's in like 98, 99?
So Paul's Club was where I was in 98, 99. I was drinking at Jenna's.
Okay, I always confuse that. I think
the greatest part about going back to Madison, I feel like, is that it's deeply conservative in the best way, because like nothing ever kind of changes. Like, and I feel like there's something deeply comforting about that. I guess it's a farmer thing where like a lot of farmers, who have massive, huge overheads are very conservative. They have to, the outlay for machinery, the outlay for crops, the knowledge that you could have a bad year and need to have money in the bank. I feel like it's a state filled with very mostly fiscally conservative, but somewhat socially conservative people. But it's almost, the socializing there, it takes on. They're very serious about that.
Yeah, and they're serious about the old-fashioned.
Yes.
They're serious, obviously, about beer.
Yes.
When you're at Paul's Club, what are some of the early drinks that you're making, that you're learning to make, that you're kind of starting this, I would say probably an interest. Yeah. I'm not sure it's a profession by then, but an interest at least in making drinks.
It's funny as I look back to, I went to Wisconsin in 95. I started bartending in 95, 96. So I started working in a bar. I worked at State Street Brats, which is still open. Yeah. It's still amazing. But Paul's Club was like the sort of the serious adult bar that I started as a door person and ended up managing. I was there for, I think, 4 or 5 years. And as I look back to that time, like 1998 was a big year that I think the Bombay Sapphire comes out around that time. I think Patron comes out around that time. So, I also remember that the single malts like Oban, Lagavulin, Dalwhinnie, those came out a few years before this time. And also, this was the beginning of the small batch bourbon movement, where like Booker's and Basil Hayden and Blanton's and these like sort of. So when we were in college, as a lot of people were drinking Long Island iced teas and Alabama Slammers and Swamp Waters, I was drinking Bombay Sapphire and tonics, and I actually remember going to the Magnus and spending my Paul's Club tips. I was drinking Hirsch 16 and Hirsch 20.
Oh my gosh, Hirsch. Wow, to get anything with a number with Hirsch. Wow, save that bottle. Yeah, I was definitely at Amy's Cafe drinking Long Island iced teas, just to give you my context.
Yeah, but I feel like once I started bartending, especially like closer to the capital, I was making a lot of money there.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you talk about 98 as being this year, I want to dig into this. So Bombay Sapphire, so before Sapphire, that expression is released. What is Bombay then?
I mean, basically, like Bombay is just a red bottle, which still exists. But I mean, when we were in college, the martini was so ascendant. It was when you went out for drinks in the 90s, you went out for martinis. And that could be anything from a Miller Lite to a Long Island iced tea to a lemon drop, So it really, the martini, like people went out for martinis until really around the Pegu Club, when the old fashioned finally, like the coupe glass toppled the martini glass, and then the old fashioned and the big ice cube kind of took them down after that sort of coupe really took it out its knees.
Do you remember the Cosmo debuting in Madison? Do you remember?
I worked at Cafe Momar for about a year and a half or two with Brandon and Bob and Ben and
Shirley
Shannon.
Manson and Butch Vig.
Yeah, I mean, we had it was like Roscoe Mitchell concerts, and it was so cool. I was a huge Smashing Pumpkins fan, and serving Butch Vig was very cool. Without casting any shade or aspersions, like we had fresh lemon and lime juice every day at Cafe Momar, and we were making fresh juice sidecars. There was a bar next door called The Sidecar, which Gabe Stolman ran for a while after I was gone. Virgil Abloh also DJ'd there with him, who was his best friend. But we were making fresh ingredient classic cocktails in Madison, Wisconsin at Cafe Memoir in the 90s. It was also happening, it probably happened a little bit at the Magnus, and it probably also happened at Tornado as well.
How did those recipes get to Madison then? Was there a funnel from New York? Was stuff happening in New York that was informing Madison, or were people in Madison just doing it?
You know what's fascinating? I don't know the answer. Craig and Shannon and I haven't talked in forever, but I will say that there was a drink that became famous in Madison that I think might have become famous at Paul's Club or nearby called the Combustible Edison. And there was a Boston-based DJ and musician named Brother Cleve who just passed a couple years ago, sadly. But Brother Cleve was the origin of Misty Calcafin and John and Jackson, and it was called the Jack Rose Society in Boston. Yeah. And he remembered gigging in Madison and remembers drinking Combustible Edisons there. So I think, sadly, Brother Cleve is not here to help me answer that question, but I feel like my sort of armchair, sort of like not factual journalistic guess is that in the same way that like nothing has ever changed in Wisconsin, like there's squeezing lemon or lime juice is like an old fashioned thing. And I feel like it's an old fashioned city and state.
That's why we love it.
Yeah.
Absolutely love it. Last question before I get to the final section. I mean, fact or fiction, you can pretty much find a great cocktail anywhere right now.
Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So I feel like I won't say that it is either fact or fiction. I say I don't mean to be like solipsistic or slippery, but I will say that like, can I find a great cocktail everywhere? No, but I think that some people can. It depends on where you're looking and what you're looking for.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my point, and maybe you can address this, is that because of the work that was being done at all the places that you mentioned in the early 2000s, it is now virtually impossible to go to a major city and not have a great cocktail list and likely very good made cocktails. So I'm kind of differentiating. I'm saying like the actual lists are interesting. I mean, who knows what the execution is, but
yeah, I think that I've talked to a few like kind of grumpy, salty friends of mine, and I would definitely say that like it is certainly progress that like you can go almost anywhere now and expect to be able to like order a margarita and like be asked if it's straight up on the rocks, salt or no salt. And maybe even some enthusiastic bartender will ask you if you'd like a Tommy's margarita or with Cointreau, like whatever. But I think that the proliferation of lists where every place has to have its own cocktail menu in some ways has worked against the kind of customer in that not every bar and restaurant should have innovative like for instance, you showed me the Jenna's list earlier.
Yeah.
And other than the Dirty Shirley, which is an abomination in many ways, is like it's a list filled with classic cocktails. And I feel like most places, I think, should have a list of classic cocktails. And then there are some places where there's some virtuoso mixologist who should create their own list. But I think that, I guess coming from Wisconsin and being a salty mixologist, like I'd like to see more lists of classics and not necessarily like everyone under the sun kind of creating their own universe of drinks.
Yeah, I'll leave it at that. This is Taste Best Guests about the discerning taste. So to close this interview, here's a little rapid fire, fast and furious taste check. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
The best fruit.
I thought about this, and I think it's the mango, but that's a eating fruit, not a mixological fruit.
We're going like straight, like you, human being.
Mango.
Not, okay. Worst vegetable.
I love all vegetables, but the rutabaga is hard.
Oh, I don't think I've even messed with a rutabaga.
A rutabaga is it's acquired taste.
Yeah, it's probably very vegetal. I'm not even going to think about it. The best dessert.
This is going to disappoint a lot of people, but I'm just going to go with chocolate cake.
Yeah, it's when it's good, it's good. And do you have a favorite in mind, restaurant-wise?
Ooh, my gosh. No, actually, Tara Lou is pastry goddess in Portland, Oregon, and I think she's at No Saint right now. She used to be at Ava Jean's. So whatever cake Tara Lou is making in Portland, Oregon.
Tough one. Your favorite cookbook of all time?
This is a tough one, and I think that the cookbook that is most used in my house is Marcello Hazan's Classic of Essential Italian Cooking. As I was thinking, like as a person of likes things and who like is a like sort of dilettante about cookbooks, I think the prune book might be my most precious. I think it is a precious thing. And I think Gabrielle Hamilton's taste and writing are exquisite.
Yeah, and like as a package, you mentioned it as an object.
Curved
very
corners, the moleskin thing, the way
notes.
that she has like the tape and the notes and like she has a recipe for like tinned fish. I mean, she is just in the same way that Julie Reiner is a bad person. She is a bad person. Like she is a genius.
Yeah, and I think we're all anxiously waiting to see the next output. Like what's going to happen.
Or like she can put down her knives for all I care. I mean, she is done.
I meant writing. I don't care. I mean, Prune's a private dining space. She can do whatever she wants in that space. But I'm talking about like writing. Like what's your next book?
Blood, Bones, and Butter is just
devastating in the best way possible. A couple tough ones, but I think you're going to rise to this. Your favorite New York City restaurant right now?
I had dinner at Chouquette a couple nights ago.
Yeah, you mentioned it.
And
cool.
It was very good.
I haven't been back in a minute. That's a great reminder. Chouquette, go there. Favorite Portland restaurant? I got to spend about 4 nights in Portland recently, and I had such a good time.
I am a regular at Lovely's 50/50. Yeah. And I have to say that like I don't tip. She was on some Netflix show, and there's usually lines out the door there now. She was up for Outstanding Chef. And I've been eating there since I moved there. There's like ice cream and pizza, and I love it. I usually get it to go, but it is a wonderful restaurant too.
Good answer. Do you miss Andy Ricker's restaurants in Portland?
No, because they're impossible to get into. I missed his restaurants in Brooklyn where I could typically like New York my way into them.
Yeah.
And he and I ended up becoming friends, and he's lovely. But yeah, like I don't.
The ones in Portland were a little more challenging. Yeah.
Yeah, busy. And like Portland, the rules, everyone waits in Portland.
You like living there?
Yes, I do like living there.
Yeah, you pause for a second, but I know you like.
They don't like me there, but I like being like. I feel like eventually Portland will acknowledge that, like, as a homeowner and having a child there, and my parents living there, and me being there for a decade. Like, at some point, they will have to figure out that I am theirs, whether they like me or not.
But no bar.
That's their choice. Like that, I feel like I recently did a shift it's funny, I did a guest at shift at the Stumptown that just opened up. They asked me if I'd like make non-alcoholic coffee drinks, and I love coffee.
Yeah. And
Stumptown's an institution in Portland, and I did it, and like no one came, and I was like, oh, this is why I'm not at Takibi. This is why Takibi's not open. Like I could sit here and feel bad on your podcast, but like
no, you're not feeling bad. I think you're just being straight talk. But is it just a matter of that city has its guys and you're just not in the club yet? Or is it just a matter of that city has enough guys and you don't need another guy?
I think the club is not interested in new membership. It's not taking new members right now. I think that's part of it. Yeah. And I think that also, unlike New York, there's dining dollars don't go as far, and there's so many good restaurants in Portland. So I just think as an operator, I would like to think that that I could open a place and that I would be able to like sort of like make my own way. And it doesn't necessarily work like that. You need everybody's buy-in. And so it's been I had a pandemic that also kind of got in the way of the orientation.
It took a few years.
My orientation was segmented by a pandemic. So I'm hoping that I don't know, maybe a third book and in my second decade, Portland could warm up to my cold heart.
Let's hope for that. And I have to shut up Peter Cho at Hanok and Jeju. Jeju is like on fire. Your favorite city outside America to visit for food and drink?
That took me half a second, and that is Tokyo. I'm obsessed with Japan, and I love Tokyo more than anything.
I feel like I interviewed you or talked to you like probably 2007, 2008, before I started writing about Korea and had been there. I've been there many times since. And I remember talking to you about Tokyo at that time, and you were like, you said the same thing. And I was like, man, I am really fucking up by not going there.
No, I mean,
I've always been very attuned to Japanese culture.
I love Tokyo too. Yeah. I just feel like it is. I love Japanese culture. I love Tokyo. It's every time I go back, it's an onion that I peel back another layer, and it's deeply rewarding to travel there. So yeah, and I've been to Seoul twice, and I've also had wonderful warm experiences in Seoul. But I've been fortunate enough to get invited and go back to Tokyo much more frequently than I've gotten to go to Korea.
You have to when you go to Korea, just think about the coffee scene there.
I know it's
they're
serious.
lapping Japan right
Julie
now.
Wolfson is my like coffee person in America, and she's been back there a bunch. And like I love, like obviously LA is a massive Koreatown, so I feel like there's a big connection between what's going on in LA and what's going on in Seoul and Korea.
Last one, your favorite sandwich?
I know this is going to disappoint a lot of people too, but I had a very good turkey club in Portland, and I feel like a turkey club is a sandwich that just it needs a lot more love than it usually gets. But a good turkey club really captures my heart.
It's an extremely difficult sandwich.
It pulls my heartstrings.
It really does when it's good. But think about it. You got to make sure.
Remember the Nick's Turkey Club?
Yes, of course I do.
So I feel like
that's insane. I've loved that.
Yeah, I feel like the Nick's Turkey Club in Madison, Wisconsin, like that is what I'm talking about when I say I love the turkey club.
Are you seated? Yes, you are. I'm watching you. Are you ready for this news?
Yeah.
Nick's closed like 2 months ago. Literally 2 months ago, it closed. It's going to become a Mexican restaurant. Don't know if the aesthetics can remain the same.
Do you know, what did the family?
I believe there was a death.
Yeah.
But don't quote me on that. But God, so many memories in Nick's.
Nick's was 2 doors down from Paul's Club. There was many a turkey club that fueled me for my life.
Jim Meehan, thank you so much for joining This Is Taste.
Yeah, thank you. I'm looking forward to that colorful portrait that I feel like all the most famous people in the world get after they sit on your Taste Podcast.
Well, Ellie's gonna kill this one. So
make sure to get all the hair just right on top.
Thanks, buddy.
Absolutely.
This is Taste is hosted by Eliza Abarbanel and me, Matt Rodbard. The show is produced by Shalia Harris and Pat Stango and edited by Clayton Gumbert. Theme music by Steve Rydell. Visit Taste online at tastecooking.com and make sure to subscribe to our newsletter for updates on all cool things that are happening.